Hello.
Hello. Hey, Subhi.
Hi, Vede. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good as well. Let's just wait for Ayush and I'll just,
Yeah.
check the logistics once before so that we don't have any problem at that moment.
Of course.
Yeah.
Quick question. I was going through
Yeah.
I'd gone through the doc before also,
Yeah.
but now I was going through it once again.
Yeah.
Hey, just give me 1 second. Are
Sure.
you? Hey,
हे वैदिक क्या
hey,
हालचाल
बढ़िया. Yeah. Hey, Subhi. Yes, I think Ayush is just joining. Let me
Sure.
also turn on my video.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me just unmute Ayush as well.
Yeah. Let me.
कूल है क्या हालचाल वैदिक
Good यार, क्या हो रहा है?
बस कुछ नहीं चल रहा है ये वेबिनार तो आपके साथ तो कैंडिड ही होगा यार मतलब लाइक इसमें मैं तो कुछ ये देखा वेखा नहीं है कि प्रिपरेशन वगैरह क्या करनी है एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा
हाँ, मैं भी वही अभी I was just asking the same question to Subhi ki like I couldn't understand doc में क्या था, but मतलब I understand the question but I don't understand the structure exactly कि who is
Yeah.
asking who what. So
Yes. So Vedic and Ayush, I'll just suggest
So
you,
we
Ayush, I think your network is lagging a bit.
yeah.
गुड
I think let me just inform him कि उनका network lag
Yeah.
कर रहा है. Let me call.
Can you hear me clearly or should
Yes, yes, Vedic, I can.
Okay, cool.
सुरभि इज इट बेटर नाउ
हाँ सर अभी हाँ इट्स बेटर बट जैसे बीच बीच में लैग कर रहा है तो आई वुड सजेस्ट कि जैसे अभी फिर से लैग कर रहा है
Yeah.
या इट इज लैगिंग अगेन
How many people are we expecting? Like how if people signed up or something? Yeah.
Yeah, we have over 100 registrations, Vedic. Let's hope people would join.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
And these also become ways for you to collect leads after the event
Yeah,
also.
yeah, it's like on-demand generation, so let's hope.
Yeah. Do you have like people from outside of India also signed up or?
Yeah, they have. We have quite a few people.
Oh, nice.
Let's see.
And the end-to-end time would be what, 30, 35 minutes?
Hi, Vedic. Sorry, I was just talking with Ayush. She's coming back. There's some problem with the network.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were you saying?
I was asking how long the main content is going to be, like 30 minutes, 35 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, 35 to 40 minutes around. Yeah.
And then questions.
Yeah. Questions from the audience.
Okay.
So basically, I was just saying before as well that, we try to keep it as candid as possible for you and for the audience as well. The agenda document is just there for a backup, so that we know the flow of the talk. Baki to it's not like a problem at all. And one thing is there, like, this particular topic, it's a bit more subjective than the ones we have done in the past. So we just have to keep one thing in the mind, like, if you see the questions also, they revolve around, the same topic of how to engage, engineers in the FinOps activities and how it's not their core job. So we just have to keep in mind, like, whatever a particular question is conveying, the answer is delivering that kind of that much only, so that we do not extend the time limit on a particular question much.
Sure, got it. And quick question, will you be asking questions?
Yeah, I'll be doing that. I'll be moderating.
So we'll start with like the introductions and then.
Yeah. I'll be introducing you guys, and then I'll be throwing questions at each one of you and Ayush, and then you can just answer the question.
I see, got it.
Yeah. Ayush is just joining. He's facing some abrupt electricity issues. I think he's there.
I see. That's all right.
Hello.
Cool. Just give me 1 minute, Surbi.
Ayush, your voice is echoing a bit.
I'm just fixing a few things there.
Yeah.
Okay. It should not break now, Surbi, hopefully.
Yes, it's good now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so I briefed about, the whole concept of how we'll be going with the webinar to Vedic Ayush. I think if you have any questions, so I can address them as well. Let me know.
No, I think I'm perfectly good. Yeah. Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Ayush will hang out, I guess, after the call.
Yes, absolutely, Vedic.
Uh,
काफी time से we haven't basically
uh,
connected for long. So yeah,
yeah.
wanted to also chat about a few things what's going on.
Let's talk after the call. But
Correct.
Abhi, are you in Noida?
Yeah, I'm like right now in Noida, and I think as I mentioned last time, right, कि abhi shifted with my wife over here.
Yeah.
So, like that is the case, and like abhi my wife is going with a like I think बताया था आपको like
Yeah, she had an injury, right? Like during the wedding. How's she?
that's basically going on right now. I think it's gonna take at least like 1 month more for her to like sort of like really start walking. तो अभी वही वाला phase चल रहा है.
Yeah, ligament tears are the worst.
Yeah, correct. Arey, it's very painful. I think, like especially this ACL tear. No, once it gets like to 100% ACL tear, so that is where like the real pain like really starts, and the recovery period is also like 3 to 4 months. So that's like horrible for the person going through it because you can't like really move, you can't like do stuff, etc. So that like really gets a toll.
Yeah. I know. I mean that I can understand because I mean I injured my knee while running last year.
Acha.
I mean it's not that I can't move around, but I can't do any physical activity, like playing sports or something for well, it's been over a year now. So,
Correct.
I mean that's been very frustrating. Not being able to walk is like next level, right? So
Definitely. And I think exactly sports though is like a very, very long-term thing ki, okay, this is basically because I think the doctor also like mentioned Soumya that okay, hey, like you will not be able to sort of like really wear your heels, etc. And that was like another thing for them ki ab kaise hoga, things like that. So I think that is again a painful thing to like be into.
sure. Yeah. So how does this work? Like, do we have like people coming in now?
Yeah. I think
Yeah, I think we'll be starting by 12:05. Just wait a few more minutes to join.
Sounds good.
usually Vedic, how we do this is ki, we wait for I think around 5 odd minutes for people like sort of join in and then Surbi basically is like moderating the call, and this is just I would say more like a dialogue flow and a healthy conversation between two people, at least by the looks of so far webinar experiences that I had.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's going to be fun, definitely, because the last I would say 2 or 3 webinars that I've been a part of, like we didn't like really stick to like the topics of the flow that is sort of like being there, and something came up like very tangentially, and then we like started going deep dive into it. So I think and that is where I think it becomes more and more engaging for people as well.
Right. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, it's conversations like these instead of like a script really that helps uncover interesting things that and experiences in companies, right, that people can learn from. I find the best format of some of these things is just like get together with people and talk about these things over coffee or beer.
Correct.
But
Absolutely.
you can't reach
of course
hundreds of people to that. So, but yeah, I'm excited for this, and I'm sure this is going to be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we have people joining in, and people can keep joining in, but I think we can start now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for finding the time to join us today. We welcome you to the 3rd episode of Driving Cloud Success with OpsLyft, and we are really excited to host you this afternoon. If you have any questions for our speakers during the event, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We'll be more than happy to address each one of you at the end of the event. So let us just begin by, throwing some light on the fact that the way businesses operate is changing really fastly today. Every coming day, it is becoming increasingly important for engineers to adopt FinOps to ensure that their work is aligned with the organization's financial goals and that they are building systems that are cost efficient and effective, right? So, but how to ensure we achieve the financial goals and smooth collaboration among the teams to keep the workflow better? And what are the best practices to follow here? Today's episode is all about diving deeper into how important it is for engineers to get involved in FinOps and the impact it creates in the business. And much more on this episode, how to engage engineers in FinOps and cloud cost savings with Ayush Kumar, founder and CEO at OpsLyft, and a very eminent guest speaker for the day, Vaidik Kapoor. Vaidik has more than 12 years of experience in software engineering, and he's passionate about building products, platforms, and organizations. He is an expert in DevOps practices, SRE, cloud-native technologies, software architecture, and technology leadership. With a deep interest in these areas, Vaidik brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. We welcome you, Vaidik and Ayush. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. So, Vaidik, I'd like to start with you. If you could throw some light on the basics first, here for our audience. So, why FinOps, and like why is it important today?
Right. So, I mean, I was just thinking before coming here, right? Like, I think the importance of FinOps, to understand the importance of FinOps, we first need to understand just how IT worked before, right? I think FinOps is a term that's thrown around a lot in the context of cloud. But before cloud was really a big thing, IT was largely IT procurement used to be a capex decision, right? So, buying servers, setting up data centers, buying licenses that you buy for a long period of time, and all those kinds of procurement cycles. Typically a finance or procurement function was always involved in a company, right? And the nature of deploying IT was very different. But with cloud coming in, that changed because now you can get things on demand. So at a very high level, IT changed a lot from being a very capex heavy operating model to an OpEx model, right? But what did not change very quickly when cloud came through was how your financial practices, what kind of a role they need to play in IT or in tech, right? That sort of like led to companies seeing like huge bills on public cloud platforms, and that sort of like pushed that if we need to bring finance back into this, whatever it is, like the game has changed completely. But it doesn't mean that we don't think about our financial practices. And because cloud just makes it so easy for developers to move forward and provision infrastructure and do things. I mean, it's great from the perspective of innovation, but if proper guardrails are not in place, you do end up seeing huge cloud bills. And I think the concern really is that you don't want to waste money. It's just that you want to make sure that the money you're spending is well utilized, right? So I think that's one thing that happened generally, where FinOps as a practice sort of started picking up that the way that finance used to be integrated in IT needs to change because IT has changed so much. And particularly so right now because of what's happening economically in the world right now. It's extremely important for companies to save or to reduce wastage wherever they can and save money wherever they can. And because there's just so many businesses that are digital, if they're digital, it's likely that they're on the cloud. And because they might not have thought about FinOps and financial guardrails properly on the cloud, it just becomes a highly relevant topic, for most companies, right? So that's what makes FinOps so important, right? Because there's just so many more businesses today that are using public clouds, but don't really have their engineering teams as well as their finance teams enabled to understand how to operate in that kind of an environment. That's what makes FinOps really important today, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Vaidik. FinOps is definitely becoming increasingly important in today's business world. As organizations continue to adopt FinOps technology, they can gain better control and visibility over their finances. So here I'd like to ask you again, Vaidik, let's dive a bit deeper into this. Today it's quite evident that engineers tend to postpone tasks and avoid discussions related to cloud cost activities. They want to write code and close Jira tickets. They don't really, care about cost. So, and as a result, usually companies can save only 20 to 30% of the possible savings. Since, back and forth communication with the engineers about reviewing the resources takes a lot of time, IT guys generally try to avoid the next round of communication with engineers, and a company just accepts that they cannot save more. So how do you think this complete situation can be improved?
Right. So, I mean, let's for a second, let's not talk about finance. Let's talk about DevOps, right? And what happened with DevOps, really, right? Again, going back in time, and I think it's very important to understand these contexts as to like how the industry has changed over the years. There was a time when we used to have sysadmins, right? And there's no concept of SREs or DevOps. And then there were engineers who were writing code, and but the code was deployed by these sysadmins on production, and sysadmins are responsible for uptime of production, right? And that sort of led to like a very weird cultural divide and silos where sysadmins wanted things to be slow because they want their goals were aligned to stability, and the developers they wanted to ship out things really fast because their goals were aligned to business outcomes for the company, which is increasing revenue or sales or whatever that might be, right? And here you see that there were two opposing forces that sort of created even worse culture, because of which the companies were actually not able to move as fast as they wanted to, while making sure that their applications work really well. A very similar thing sort of exists today also for most companies in context of cloud costs, right? So the finance team says that, or they have goals to make sure that the costs are low, while the dev teams sort of want to ship really fast. And DevOps has sort of like also integrated there, where they're enabling developers to ship things really fast, and cloud enables them to ship things really fast. But the silo still exists, right? And to remove the silo and to make cost something that engineers or DevOps also worry about on an ongoing basis instead of a task that they have to do because somebody has said that they need to reduce cost. We have a lot of wastage. Is that you have to make it a goal for the developers or their managers or their head of engineering, whatever, to make sure that cost is also one of the things that they need to worry about, while also making sure that the finance guys are not just looking at costs in isolation, but also what is the impact of reducing costs in terms of the ability to move fast, right? Which sort of also brings us back to this entire thing that finance and engineering also need to be integrated really well, right? So that's a high level thing that drives the culture, right? Because of which, in isolation, otherwise, if the goals are set in a way where developers are only asked about like why a feature is not going out on time, then, well, they will just worry about that. But when you put the guardrail of saying, all right, we want to ship things, but we want to ship things sustainably. And hey, there's a finance team that's there to enable you to model the cost of your work. Then engineers start understanding what's the impact of the work that they're doing and why it is important to factor in cloud costs while they're building things, right? So it is a little bit of a cultural thing that you have to enable by putting good structures in place and make sure that at least our finance and technology divisions at a leadership level at least talk and want to enable each other to meet each other's goals. Right. I think that's very, very important. And then that starts to trickle down, because the managers in your finance function as well as an engineering function are worrying about company goals instead of their own function goals. And that starts to sort of come in conversations in your engineering sprint planning, or building product roadmaps, or taking any kind of engineering decisions, right? And that starts to trickle down all the way down to your developers, because when managers start worrying about those things on an ongoing basis when building things, instead of cleaning things up after the fact, that is the change that you're really looking for, right? So that's where you want to go. But it starts from having like good monitoring in place, I think, which also requires integration of finance and engineering really well. I think the first thing there for most teams to do is just make sure that they're reviewing costs very accurately, and not just like saying, all right, this is the total AWS cost, but you want to look at cost of every product, every microservice, the cost of the infrastructure cost of every team, and what are the trends that are being followed, and start questioning and start understanding why these costs are like this today, right? And once you start having that dialogue, you just start understanding the cost structure of your business much better.
Yeah.
And then finance can come in and help actually optimize. So they can actually come in and enable engineering leaders, and they can then start coaching their engineers, and have this entire framework slowly for your custom built for your organization that helps engineers think about cost more proactively than always being reactive and being thrown over tasks to clean up infrastructure.
Correct.
So I think there's a paradigm shift that companies need to make sure that every engineer, or at least most engineers, start caring about cloud cost instead of looking at that as tasks.
Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with you here, Vedic. While we completely acknowledge that they don't care about cost and they don't want to take new responsibilities, but I think engineers need to have only one simple task: to be responsible for their own resources, right? And for that, a company's job is to make it really instrumental for them, so that this whole process of cost cutting becomes simple and non-intrusive. So,
Right.
moving.
I'll quickly intervene there, right? Like to add to that, I think one important part there is that people want to do good work, right? It's not that they don't want to do this. It's just that that's what they're being judged on. And if the right goals are not set, they will never worry about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, most engineers I've met in my life, I think they just want to do really good work. That's it. And they can understand all of this. It's not very complex. It's just that they're not questioned about those things in a healthy way. And that's where the struggle is.
Definitely. So Ayush, as Vedic was discussing, he's discussing the paths to improvement in this whole scenario of engaging engineers, right? So how much impact do you think this culture would create in a certain organization? We'd like to know this from you.
Okay, yes. Of course, I think as Vedic mentioned, right, that FinOps is basically like, if done right, is basically going to be the integration between finance and engineering at the end of the day, right? So let's basically talk about that. Okay, what would be the potential impacts if we don't do this right altogether? So if you look at I think what Vedic mentioned, right, that the ultimate basically repercussions that we really see is basically the cloud bills really going high, and people are spending tons of money upon the cloud. And then there is one I would say silently growing viral thing, negative viral thing across the engineering also, that our architectures also sort of become starts to basically become so unorganized in terms of cost efficiency, which is very hard to kind of really reverse at some point in time, right? So I think the impact which we basically would want to see from a, I would say, efficient FinOps culture in an organization has to really be seen in terms of two lenses, right? The first is basically, of course, that we always basically have the quantity of money that we're spending upon the cloud in such a way that it is always being justified with respect to the usage of the application, so the scale that we are at in terms of the company, right? I think that's everyone's what is really looking for. I mean, it's not about that, okay, hey, we are spending $3 million annually upon the cloud, or we're spending $100 million annually upon the cloud. I mean, Netflix spends approximately, I think, around $300 to $400 million annually upon AWS, right? But I don't think so that they are in a that they're really questioning so much about that, okay, hey, this spend is sort of very much unjustified, because they know that the scale they're at, and the kind of engineering systems that they've really built, right? The scale and the quality of their engineering systems really justifies that number altogether, right? So I think that is something, that, and of course, there are other organizations that we I kind of really heavily speak about and speak with them as well, that, okay, hey, what's the state of your cloud cost? And then what is something that you would like to get it to, right? And that is where I think, people say that, okay, hey, we're spending around $10 to $15 million annually upon the cloud. cloud, and we've hired basically a bunch of people or basically set the OKRs of people to kind of like get it down to like, let's say 30-40%, right? And now once like if you start questioning people why on this, that okay, hey, how did you even like sort of like really come to this fact that okay, I would want to kind of like get my cloud cost reduced by like let's say 30-40%, right? And why is that basically number coming into play? So that's where people like, of course, the finance people like really come on to the budget part of the things, that okay, hey, because I could only allocate this much of basically my expenditure upon the cloud, that okay, still understood like up to that part, right? But once we start looking more inwards, right, to like finally figure out the nature of the problem. So after solving, I would say the basics of it, that you basically sanitize all of your infrastructure, and now like you are basically going ahead for the bigger like savings altogether, right? And that is when you learn, right, that okay, hey, it's the fundamental architecture problem at the end of the day. People essentially did not take into account that, as Vaidik mentioned, the cost efficiency while building their systems altogether, right? That was not so far the basically the KRA of people, that okay, hey, you not be only basically be judged on the basis of the shipments that you're basically doing in terms of the rollouts of the feature sets, in terms of their performance, stability, reliability, and basically the cost efficiency is something that's not even a KRA, like was not even a KRA of the people at all altogether, right? So that led to basically the building up of the engineering systems that were not cost sustainable in nature, up to I would say some regards, right? And this is a more dangerous impact as compared to, I would say, the bill that people are concerned at a certain state of the company at that point. I mean, of course, you can like always basically get down your bills from like, let's say a certain amount, like to lessen that by, let's say 10-15%. I mean, every organization can easily do that at whatever scale, I think, right? But the more dangerous thing that people could like really land into, right? That if their engineering systems and architectures are sort of, like really like having so much of technology debt, right? That it is almost impossible for them to kind of like rewire those systems in a cost efficient way. That is going to perpetuate like going forward as well, right? And that is when basically organizations are like really stuck into this basically always cost high loop, right? That it is almost impossible for them to like really get out of it, right? So I think that is what I believe Surbhi is basically like the impact of not having a standard FinOps culture basically into the like right from the very start, right? And this also basically counterintuitively like sort of answers that question as well, that if you have the FinOps culture right from the very start, right, it's the cost efficiency that you like achieve at any scale, which ultimately justifies the amount of money that you're like spending upon the cloud. So yeah, that is, I think, would be my take on this.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing that, Ayush. That definitely gave us an understanding of how impactful it is for an organization if every team member can help build an effective cloud usage experience, and manage cloud costs effectively. So moving ahead, Vaidik, I'd like to understand it from you. It is recognized, that generally engineering spins up resources without standardized guidelines, such as setting up budgets and alerts, or even appropriate, resource tagging. So although this freedom empowers velocity and better product development, it's not quite the optimal way to build an R&D process, right? And it often becomes a challenge to view cost from an engineering and finance perspective. So what do you think could be some of the best possible practices of FinOps that engineers should adopt?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just like a financial problem, right? Or just a FinOps problem. I think it's an overall engineering problem that you have no control over, what's happening in your architecture, and what you are going to end up into is essentially chaos, right? Like if a business takes off, but you don't have I mean, you want to enable people to do whatever they want to do and move really fast. That's like almost like a universal truth about every business, right? And that's the whole point of being on cloud as well. But just like allowing people to do, the other extreme of this is whatever is can be very harmful, right? And hence you need good guardrails in place to at least make sure that you have. I think the first point is you need guardrails for them to make lesser mistakes. And if they make mistakes, you want to be able to resolve them quickly, right? So, I mean, the way that you're talking about cloud costs, I think security is another thing that you want to care about the same way, right? Like For example, if you give access to your developers on AWS to spin up EC2 instances themselves, they could be provisioning in EC2 instances that are public. And that's also, that could be even more harmful than just like a little bit of a cloud spend, right? So I think the way that I think about this is, of course, all teams, all businesses should leverage the benefits that public clouds bring, which is agility, speed, innovation. But the first thing that you need to think about in your architecture systematically is what are the safety nets that allow people to make lesser mistakes while moving fast, right? And that could be like cost safety nets, that could be security safety nets, there could be reliability safety nets, right? And if you were to like very quickly take an example of each of these, just to draw analogies, security safety net is all right. We are going to give developers access to provision EC2 instances, but they cannot provision public EC2 instances, for example, right? There's a simple safety net. Another one is all the instances will use the same operating system with the same packages configured the same way, so that again, people are not using let's say vulnerable packages in EC2 instances that are spinning off using whatever AMIs that you're using, and hence we'll have something like a golden AMI. From a cost perspective, you'd say, all right, we are going to make sure that tags are there everywhere in the process of provisioning, so that we can report on who is provisioning, which team is provisioning, what is the purpose that they've provisioned it for. Is it for product or dev or just pure play R&D? Right? And then we can look at costs from that perspective, because you could have a month where your R&D costs have shot up, but you don't necessarily need to worry about it so much, because it's just R&D costs that can be very easily brought down by basically saying that we are not going to do any R&D, right?
Yeah.
And as a business, when you have visibility into those things, then you're not questioned every single day about why this cost increased, right? Some of those answers are readily available, and hence it just makes life for everyone much easier. And similarly for reliability, a very simple example is you're provisioning production infrastructure. It has to be multi-AZ, let's say, right, to avoid AZ level failures, right? So these are safety nets. Once you have safety nets, and another safety net for cost could be like making sure that you have budget alerts set, right? Once you have safety nets in place, then the next thing is, even if something goes wrong, let's say, it should be easy for you to debug what's happened. And in context of cloud costs, I think tags are extremely important, right? Like your the process of tagging infrastructure, and that usually when it happens after the fact, like after provisioning the infrastructure, you're always lagging behind, right?
Yeah,
it's very hard to catch up, and hence teams need to invest in, particularly platform engineering teams, if at all, or DevOps teams, whatever you call. I think the same thing gets a new name every year. But the process of using public cloud needs to be streamlined a little bit, right? So I'll give you an example, right? At Grofers, one of the things in the first year of my time at Grofers that we did was that I was practically the only person in DevOps, and there was another person who joined, so 2 for about 60 engineers, and the company was growing really fast. And we wanted to allow people to leverage AWS as much as possible. So we wanted to allow them to spin up new microservices very quickly and take them to production and start using them without depending on us as much as possible. And we wanted to do exactly the same thing, that we wanted to give them access to spin up infrastructure. But when we did that, we ended up in a little bit of chaos. And then we decided, all right, it's not that hard. We can streamline the process. What we ended up doing was we still allowed developers to create EC2 instances, but not from the AWS console. We actually started using something called Ansible, which is a configuration management tool, where we wrote playbooks, or in some way, basically we wrote scripts that would ask for certain prompts before a developer could provision a new EC2 instance. And on the basis of the input that the developer would provide, the right decisions would be automatically made for that developer to spin up the right kind of EC2 instance for them, right? And some of those things are very simple things, like making sure that tags are there, making sure that the instance group is balanced across AZs, making sure that we are using the latest golden AMI that we have built instead of an older version, and things like that, right? And that really allowed developers to go crazy and run a lot of experiments without depending on us. And it also provided my team and me to have visibility into what people were doing and why they were spinning up this infrastructure, right? And sort of like look at trends instead of like worrying about every single EC2 instance that is, provisioned. And that sort of like applies to everything. You can't probably do that for everything on AWS. But there's some other kind of ways that you need to make sure that those safety nets are put in place, right? And there are like great guidelines that AWS themselves have laid out. I'm sure OpsLyft also has some guidelines, but those guidelines are out there, and I think you just need to follow those guidelines in the context of your own company, and make sure that architecturally and process-wise, you have operationalized those best practices.
True. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Vivek. These insights would definitely help engineers to streamline their tasks and perform better in their day-to-day lives. So at OpsLyft, our team works with other organizations to help reduce their cost at their best. So I would like to ask you here, Ayush, according to you, what's the best possible ways to engage engineers in the process? For example, if I talk about the simplest things like engaging engineers in cloud cost management via, say, a Slack channel, right, through regular reports, alerts, and commands to manage their resource lifecycle. So what are such, actionable ways to engage engineers in this complete process, according to you?
Got it. I was just while you were speaking, Surbhi, on this, right, I was just thinking that how do I sort of like really structure this? Because I think we've been speaking about this basically thing, like I would say tangentially in our last discussions as well. Like with the product team in the company, right? So how do we sort of like really engage engineers? Again, what are like would be the, I would say, drivers of engagement of engineers, when it comes to basically having cost efficient sort of like systems built by them right from the day one, right? So I think like in my opinion, I think like there are three things to it, right? So okay, the first thing would be that, okay, how do you sort of like really you have to typically solve for three things. The first is, how do you solve for like really developing a sense of accountability on engineers, right, with respect to basically cost as well, right? And then if the accountability basically has to be developed, we have to also know that at some point in time we have to kind of like really know that, okay, yes, it might not be a core job of basically individual developer to kind of like really have a detailed control over the cloud cost, right? If not reduce it for that matter, right? So that's one consideration to be taken into account, right? Now, if this consideration is there in place, the third consideration following this consideration is like this particular thing is that, okay, if basically engineer has to kind of like really take the accountability of cloud cost and at the same point in time also realize that this is not going to be basically his core part of the job, right? So then if both the things have to be there, so how do you kind of like make this job like simpler for him or her altogether, right? So I think if we consider basically these three aspects in mind, right? So now like we have I would say actionable problem before us, that okay, what's the problem statement for engineers in order to for them to kind of like have them involved more in the process, right? So I think for developing the accountability, I think as Vadik like mentioned in the past, like I would say in the few previous discussions, right? It has to be a performance measure of people, right? It like cannot be only basically be that, okay, yes, engineers would be, I would say, incentivized basically, I would say, have basically like applauded, or basically I would say made feel gratified with respect to their performance, based upon how many, I would say, features that they've like really shipped, or basically what's the sort of like turnaround time for basic resolution of the issues with respect to the business context, etc., right? But I think having basically like kept cost efficiency as a performance measure basically also for people, this I think like could like really help altogether, right? But at the same point in time, right, I am someone like given that I'm also like coming from an engineering background, right? So I don't think that like an enforcement of a performance measure is a sustainable long-term strategy for being a good engineer in general, right? So because, and in my personal opinion, I think an engineering person like really grows in terms of his or her skill set, and also the problem solving abilities like really grows, you know, if something comes natural out of him or her, right? That engineering acumen like really, so then the question like really comes, how do you like sort of motivate people like for this, right? That okay, like being cloud cost efficient, right, is basically you know, is something that you should do in order to kind of, you know, like really like build more of basically organization as well as your personal confidence towards basically building systems altogether, right? So I think that is where I would say the logical answer to this like really lies, right? That it's not, so the problem is not about basically only saving dollar money upon the cloud, right? If it's about basically, you know, the how do you build basically efficient systems. If you build basically you know, efficient systems right from day one, right, which are basically ensuring that okay, hey, for any particular skill that we particularly hit, right, our resource usage versus basically business demand is basically going to be 100% match, right? It is not going to be, you know, a massive disconnect between, I would say, the resource usage and I would say the business demand, right? And if and that's a very hard engineering problem to then solve, like for a particular engineer, right? And that's sort of, I would say, you know, is something, a motivation that needs to be like sort of like really given to an engineer or instilled in a very deeply technical way, right? I think me and Vedic like have like spoken about this like a lot of times, like in the previous like sessions where we've connected, right? I think and if that is being able to done well, right, I think that is when like you really start involving basically engineers in a very organic way, you know, in like FinOps management overall, right? And then of course, if even this motivation is there, right, but given this is a hard problem for any engineer to kind of like really solve at any scale, right, that is when I think, you know, like the need of, I would say, the tooling and I would say the automations like really comes into picture for like, for the matter that the company like us like really exists for that matter, right? That if you're able to sort of like really make the lives of the engineers sort of like really simpler in terms of like doing these things, right, that if you're able to like sort of like give them the required amount of like visibility at any scale, that okay, hey, like your analytical effort of basically finding out the opportunities while basically or like building systems that where all you can like really optimize you know, on the cloud, right, so that he or she is able to like operate efficiently. And if you're able to like somehow like really you know, like tell people that okay, hey, once basically you are like deploying something, let's say in a staging environment, right, what's its basically cost going to be like from a business perspective, and also basically from a I would say service distribution perspective across different cloud services, right? All this basically dollar figure associated with their code like really helps them like think faster in terms of that okay, hey, if basically I've been able to like sort of like, let's say, release like, you know, you can say in a very ambitious way $10,000 worth of code on my staging server, right? Is it possible that by the time I reach this, make this into production, this basically comes down to like $5,000, right? And I think that's a very powerful statement for an engineer also to kind of like really feel that okay, hey, like this is one achievement unlocked for me, you know, like to like really you know, save organizations money, like, you know, from whatever thing that basically I am running into production altogether. So I think these are the few like, you know, like train of thoughts that I think I feel that is important for involving engineers in a very self-motivated way, like towards dealing with FinOps.
Yeah, I think I also add a couple of things to that. I think that's a great point there, right? Like for, I mean, let's look at businesses like Blinkit, for example, right? And I mean, for every other industry, there'll be a different way to look at cost. And it actually, any kind of cost for that matter, cloud cost included, right? So for example, at Blinkit, it helped us motivate engineers a lot more when we brought cloud cost into unit economics of the business.
Yeah.
Right. So to the level of like, all right, there's not the entire AWS cost that everybody needs to worry about, that I need to worry about. But to the last engineer, what makes sense is that if let's say they're working on the logistics systems, which is responsible for the last mile delivery, like how do we get them to understand what's the cost, what's the overall cost of logistics, what's the unit economics of that, and where does the infrastructure that runs the software for logistics, what is the cost of that? Where does that fit in? right? And they are just able to understand that much better, right? It's also in a way like a business owner's mindset, because let's say if there's no IT, you still need to understand the cost structure of your business.
Correct.
And if you're able to break down the entire AWS cost into your cost structure of the business, and have like whatever people are there, whatever teams are there, responsible for cloud cost as one of the line items of the cost structure, it just starts making a lot more sense. And you can even take holistic decisions, right? You can say that maybe at a unit level, I'm increasing my cloud cost by 1 rupee, but because we have made this change, we've been able to reduce 10 rupees overall in the unit economics, right?
Yeah.
And so how does this happen is, again, this falls from the leadership, right? Your whatever, your CTO, your head of engineering, your engineering managers or tech leads, and slowly down to the last Indian. That's how it trickles down, and the problem needs to be broken down. And then there's on the other side of your cloud cost, which is like I said, R&D or dev and staging environment. Those need to be looked at slightly different. Like dev and staging environment, I think a good way to look at that is, well, the way you invest in having a nice office space, right? You need a place for people to feel productive and being able to come to work and think, right? And I think dev stage environments a lot more like that. They're a lot more analogous to that instead of your operating cost of the business, right? The other extreme of that could be, you can say that, hey, COVID came, we just got rid of all our offices, but the business still works, right? You can fundamentally do the same thing with your dev stage environments also, right? In fact, I'm sure a lot of companies now also do these things where they shut down their dev stage environments completely at night because nobody is working, right? And like, in fact, when development was not happening during COVID, where businesses were scaling down their operations, a lot of investment in dev stage infrastructure is actually reduced quite a lot for a lot of companies, right? So the way that you look at that kind of cost is very different from the cost that you have in production, and for what function in production, right? Like your data platforms cost will be looked at very, very differently as compared to your product infrastructure cost. And again, it just comes down to making sure that finance and your tech leadership are well integrated, that they understand the cost structure of the business and where cloud costs fit in. And the problem becomes far simpler from there. It will drive good architectural decisions in engineering in a very similar way that businesses re-architect themselves to reduce their cost, overall cost, right? So I don't think in that tech or cloud is very different. I think the fundamental principles still remain.
Correct. Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Vaidik and Ayush. I think I agree with you. You know, most of the actions required for cost avoidance are engineer dependent. And if engineers are not receptive to FinOps initiatives aimed at cost avoidance, then nothing happens. So it's not just about, involving engineers for saving a particular dollar value, but it's more about encouraging engineering teams to play an active role in optimizing the value of cloud services overall to the enterprise. So moving forward, Vaidik, as you were sharing your experience at Blinkit, so we are really curious to know, at Blinkit, you have led a team of engineers for a long period of time, and as it is still the current problem making engineers act on the cloud spend. So how much has it overall, evolved in the last 3-4 years? If you could just throw some light on that, has it made any difference since then in how engineers look at it now, currently?
Right. I mean, I can't tell about now because I'm not with Blinkit, but yeah, the practice evolved quite a bit the last 3-4 years, as I think I personally also matured, but I got exposed to some fantastic people in that Blinkit hired in finance, right? Like one of I think our CFO at that point of time, Amit Sachdeva, made it a point that he understood that cloud costs are high. And well, they're going to be significantly high, no matter how optimized they are for a business like Blinkit, because it's completely tech-driven. And hence, he made it a point that finance function works very closely with me and the technology function in understanding how to factor in cloud costs, right? And they did not have the background of having worked on managing finance for an organization that uses cloud. But he hired really smart people who were very humble and ready to listen and ready to learn. And uh, the finance business partner that was aligned to work with me is this amazing guy called Sahil. He spent a lot of time actually with me and the team from AWS to actually understand how to model in his own mind how AWS works, and then actually start questioning us again to on our decisions to make sure that we are accountable, but also to act as a support system in helping us take better decisions, right? Um, so that I think was the pivotal moment in how we start to change how AWS costs are managed. Very specifically, operationally, what that meant was that Sahil and I, we would spend at least a couple of hours every week looking at the top line items in our AWS bill and their trends. And I can speak about the AWS ecosystem because that's what I have most exposure to, but I'm sure that the same is sort of applicable for GCP and Azure as well. We got Sahil training from the AWS team on how to use things like Cost Explorer, and how to understand what kind of purchase options are there, what kind of levers does Sahil have as a finance person to help optimize the cost without actually interrupting engineers at all, right? So a lot of things like purchasing things like savings plan or reserving instances, actually Sahil started making those recommendations instead of engineers thinking about them, and that was great. That was amazing, right? Because that's just something that you can, as a finance guy, just like from the outside, look at the bills, look at the usage, and do modeling of like what kind of a commitment that we can make given our cash flows as well as whatever business plans we have. So spending these couple of hours with finance reviewing cloud costs, AWS costs majorly, but eventually all of our cloud vendors like other third-party SaaS vendors as well would really help. And then we would go over each big line item in our spend and sort of like make sure that if the trends are healthy, and what is the contribution of each of these things in the unit economics of different business lines of businesses, right? And then accordingly use that practice to feed into the budgeting process, like Ayush mentioned, and that budgeting process to have a sustainable, healthy business will guide us to bring down the cost to a certain level that made sense for the business to be sustainable, right?
Correct.
Instead of just optimizing costs for no
Correct.
reason, right? So that practice I started with Sahil, and then slowly we started involving within my team. I involved a couple of my engineering managers who were part of the process, so that education started for them. In fact, after a point of time, they were just running all of that by themselves instead of me being involved every week. And slowly, we also started looping in engineering managers of other product engineering teams who were contributing in a very big way to our AWS bill. So, for example, the data team was contributing in a very big way, and the engineering manager for the data team was also looped into the process to look at cloud costs and see if there's a way that we can optimize those costs, in big steps. Or if not possible, then at least make sure that the cost guardrails are in place and we are not breaching those guardrails. So I think that's very, very important, right? And just independently, Sahil in our case was also able to negotiate a lot of really great deals with AWS, which otherwise I don't think I had the skill to do. I mean, I learned from him. That's all fine, but he saved me the time. But he also brought in optimizations without engineers being involved at all, right? And so I think that was also great. But yeah, involving all the engineering managers, educated them, that started educating their teams, that brought in the focus of cloud cost in a proactive fashion. on a day-to-day basis. So for example, any new data initiative would from the very beginning factor in, all right, if we do this, what is the cost of this going to look like? And does that make sense, right? And that becomes one of the other things that you want to worry about. Just the way that, for example, the engineers are building a new solution, let's say for a certain scale, then you have these non-functional requirements that you want to meet and you want to plan for that. Cost also became one of the things there, an important consideration. And that, I think, changed the culture in a big way, most teams.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing your experience at Blinkit, Vedic. This definitely tells us that as the time changes, it is necessary to adopt things, as they change and also understand the need of it. So moving, to the last question, maybe I'd like to know from you, Ayush. Many companies, have started to use cloud cost optimization tools on top of the in-house systems that they have for cost saving, right? So what are your thoughts on automating the process as it helps them to identify problems that are leading to unnecessary spending and resolving those issues as soon as they occur? How helpful would it be to use these SaaS tools over the in-house teams they have?
Got it. Makes sense. So I think the answer to this question, is, I would say, pretty much very same to, I would say, saying that automating the entire process that basically Vedic, like Abhi just spoke about, about how basically, the finance person basically, Sahil, he really sort of really started to understand costs, and then, sat with Vedic on I would say, weekly basis for a couple of hours, and then sort of had that analysis sort of being done, and then and as an outcome to that analysis, have some insights, actionable insights, which helped him to sort of make some purchase decisions with respect to reserved instances, savings plans, or from Vedic's perspective, to sit with the application teams to really figure out that, okay, hey, these are the top basically contributors to the cloud cost with respect to the application teams, and discussing back and forth with them that this is what we can potentially do to really release out or basically ease out the cloud cost in the company, right? I think so. As you can see, right, that this is an overall company-wide effort, right? So the problem, I think, I would say, of cloud cost management in general, I would say can be categorized, I think, broadly into basically two verticals altogether. The first, of course, is a governance part of it, right? That how do you sort of really involve everyone inside the company to really, be a FinOps cultured environment, as a FinOps cultured company overall, right? That's one part of it, right? And second is basically the optimization part, which is more about, I would say, helping basically engineering teams, become more productive in basically solving the problems associated with this, right? So the developer productivity angle of it, and I would say the governance angle of it, right? So these are, I would say, two, value propositions that I would say an automated system can really offer for basically a company to really become FinOps efficient overall, right? So, and that is where I think, the scope, or I would say the market opportunity for, I would say, a product which is basically claiming to help a company to become I would say, a cloud cost efficiently managed company, right, is really lies into, right? That if you're able to sort of really give, I would say, efficient insights to basically engineers, right? And help them do effective RCAs with respect to that, what went wrong, in case something that they missed, right? And help them basically have an effective coverage of their infrastructure, because if it's really growing, right, it's manually very hard to keep everything under check, that okay, what's happening where, right? So I think that is something that of course can be a process that has scope for automation at scale with respect to the infrastructure. And now when it comes to basically the finance people, and as well as the engineering leadership people, as Vedic mentioned, right, for them to make the company run in a FinOps cultured way, right, it's important for them to really set guardrails, as Vedic mentioned, right? Now for them to have this guardrail sort of really first implemented across the organization, and then being effectively tracked, right? Because as what we say, right, if we can't basically measure something, we can't improve it, right? So I think the measurability of FinOps across the organization, right, that's the governance part of it, right? And that also has a lot of scope to get prioritized, or basically simply put automated, right? that's where I think, like tools like which are basically out there in the market, which are doing cost optimization like efforts for or helping companies to become cost efficient, right, are basically focused on like these verticals, right? I think OpsLyft also basically sort of like focuses on basically these two verticals, wherein helping engineers to kind of like I would say gain control and I would say minimize and be in a control of cloud cost in the least amount of time and effort. I think that's the one I would say thing that needs to be looked into in current, I would say, environment. And then of course, as basically Vaidik mentioned, like giving basically a product experience which could basically help an educational context to a basically finance person with respect to cloud cost, right? Because that's sort of a like black box to them when they like really start with it, right? And then like taking this black box and bridging that gap between the engineering teams and the finance, right? That's the second problem that like importantly needs to like really get solved, right? So I think that's like sort of something, should be where the scope of I would say the cloud cost management systems like kind of like really lie in companies which are like scaling in their infrastructure like every day in and day out.
Yeah, glad you shared that, Ayush. I think thanks for sharing that in detail, the importance of using, a SaaS tool over just the in-house systems, because although it might seem on the contrary that the best way to manage cloud spending could be spending a bit more on cost optimization tools, but because ultimately you're spending to save and the savings can be massive. So coming to an end to our discussion, we always follow this as a ritual in each of our webinar episodes and ask our speakers if they have any final tips and tricks or any of their favorite books and resources to share that could help engineers and finance people over here in our audience to engage better in FinOps. So please go ahead. Yeah.
Vaidik, you take this up. I'm not sure. I'm not much of a book reader these days, so I'm not very sure that what would be my answer to this.
Yeah, I don't know about a book.
Yeah.
I think for FinOps, as a culture, I think I've said this multiple times today that it starts from leadership and then it trickles down. And for the leadership, I think there are a few things that I can definitely recommend if they're on the public cloud, right? If you're a sizable company, you probably have an account manager. Talk to them. You probably are entitled to some kind of like a free education session. And I think the account managers that I had at Blinkit, they were very helpful in helping me understand some of those things. So I think that's one. The second one is there are a couple of resources that I would recommend you to follow as an engineering leader about what's happening generally in the cloud cost world. One is there's a person called Corey Quinn. He runs a great newsletter called Last Week in AWS. It's about all things in AWS, but there's also a color of cost in very subtle ways that we miss as engineers that he often talks about and different things about AWS that I think is pretty interesting, and the content is hilarious. Second one is the third one. Sorry, is I'm forgetting the exact name, but I think there's a new organization that is sort of like writing
FinOps Foundation, right?
FinOps Foundation, yes,
Yeah.
FinOps Foundation.
Going to say that
I would also recommend you to follow them. I think they're developing. I think the overall purpose of FinOps is being further developed and enhanced, and content is being generated around this as we speak. I think that's probably a good source to look at about just generally learning about FinOps as well as cloud cost and like how to go about keeping it in check. But that's basically for engineering leaders. And I think again, cloud cost optimization and FinOps actually starts from engineering leaders. And when I say engineering leaders, it's not just DevOps leaders, it's engineering leaders. I think they have to play a very important role. So that's what I recommend.
Yeah. I think likewise.
Yeah, you should
so,
please continue.
well, I think I was just kind of like I would say adding to, like, doing a +1 to Vedic's basically point, right? I think FinOps Foundation happens to be, give one great resource when it comes to, I would say, developing a mental framework that how we should like start thinking about FinOps in a company, right? And as Vedic mentioned, right, I think it's more about engineering leaders to kind of like, and not just DevOps leaders, but that's engineering leaders, right? FinOps Foundation offers, I think, some of the very I would say, experience driven, I would say, practices, right? That what have people like really tried in the past, and then basically what is something that people could do to kind of like at the relative scales of the company, to kind of like develop an effective FinOps culture, right? And I'll just also take this up as an opportunity. I think like in I would say another month or so, like we as a company also sort of like have are going to like sort of like start releasing that, okay, what are the, I would say, modern day practices to kind of like really have like cloud costs under basically a standard or a controlled umbrella, right? Because I think one of the things that I think what we sort of like we realize that FinOps as a implementation, right, in a company, and I would say in any organization, is also basically contextual to the stage at which the company is like really operating for, right? I mean, if you talk about like, let's say this, I would say the very early stage startups, for them, FinOps could like really mean very differently, right? For them, I think it might not be even a priority for them, like at some point in time, right? And if you look at like very, very large enterprise, right, where like potentially like, let's say 10,000 plus people are like really working, right? For them, it's a different problem overall, right? Now, but the real, I think what I personally feel that there's certain, I would say, a lack of some really great actionable content on the internet, right? Is basically companies who are in the growth stages, right? Wherein they often do not have time to prioritize basically, cloud spend management, or I would say the FinOps initiatives, right? I'm sure that we all have like really gone through that like process, right? The thing, and that is the, I would say, area which I think I feel that OpsLyft as a company should like really do a lot of justice in terms of publishing some content, because we work especially with these companies, right? Wherein people do not have enough time to kind of like really like see that, okay, how to kind of like really develop an effective FinOps culture, right? So as to kind of like solve the problem of cloud costs from a long-term perspective, right? And sharing experiences like in of this basically culture is, I think, something is going to like help a lot of companies across India as well as the US.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Vedic and Ayush. I think we have stretched our discussion a bit, but we can definitely take one of these questions we have from the audience. So the question goes like, engineers, may work in an environment where functionality and delivery deadlines are the primary drivers of effort, and where the culture of the team reinforces this outlook. So if this is where FinOps is starting from, it's no surprise that engineers may resist being held accountable for cloud cost, even as they spiral out of control. So what do you think can be done to establish the level of ownership and accountability among engineers required for effective cost avoidance?
Go ahead, Vedic. I think like you're the best person for because I think you have been there, like in this situation at Blinkit, right? So I think like I think you'll be the best person there.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing there is like I think again, I've said this before, it's not right to ask engineers for accountability without asking their managers and their leaders to ask for accountability, right? So the buck stops with them. Yeah. So accountability has to be driven top down. And I think the first person to be held accountable for costs and to ensure a FinOps culture is, I guess, I mean, if a CTO is there, then the CTO or a VP engineering or a director of engineering or a head of engineering, whatever, right? It should be their KRA to make sure that that cloud costs are under control. Because once they start worrying about it, they will worry about it systematically, or they will be pushed to worry about it systematically, right? And when they're pushed to worry about systematically, then their teams will be pushed to worry about it systematically. Right? You cannot like not keep the leaders accountable and like have the last engineer accountable for cloud costs, because I mean there's just no communication and factoring in of costs and planning and execution, right? So I think the buck stops with the leaders of the organization. They need to be made accountable. For them to be accountable, the management has to make sure that these leaders are kept accountable about cloud costs. And that's when it starts to trickle down. Companies where cloud costs are looked at as like, hey, we are doing a cloud cost optimization activity. The DevOps guys are going to come and tell you to do some things, and you do it. And then after a while, the costs increase again. And then, the DevOps guys go and tell the CTO that, the devs keep doing some things wrong, and that's why the costs increase. And the CTO then shouts at the devs and says, why do you do this? This is just a broken process where people are not working together, and it's never going to happen, right? Yeah. It is looked at as a thing which happens one-off. That's not true, right? I think that needs to change. So the intervention actually has to happen at the level of leaders. I think the previous point that I was also trying to make was that the leaders need to get educated. If you are not a leader yourself, but would like to do this, you can be nice and work with your manager or manager of managers, whoever is responsible, like maybe your CTO, and help them with some education by learning about this practice yourself and working with them in helping in proposing a solution which can help change the culture. It is a cultural shift. You are right about that. If the culture is not there to look at costs, then that culture needs to be changed. But that culture change will happen only from the leadership. You can influence the leadership, but you cannot change the culture yourself, right?
Right.
And if you can't influence the leadership, then I don't think that there's much of a hope there.
Correct. Right. I think just adding to Vedik's point over here, right? I think like we have seen this a lot, Vedik. I think like once we see like work with companies wherein so some of them are like fantastic in terms of like appreciating this thought overall, right? That okay, hey, this is basically going to be a great cultural change overall, right? And let's basically go ahead and embrace this particular change, right? Because it's this for good, right? And we've also basically, like have worked with companies where basically cloud cost happens to be a one-off sort of like fix or a priority thing that like sort of people talk about, right? And then post that basically like people are like in that opinion that okay, hey, now it is like fixed and okay, now our life is sorted and let's get back to our routine work, right? And what they don't realize, I think, in the process that okay, cloud cost, if you look at as a problem, if not as a culture overall, right? FinOps, like these are like two different things altogether, right? So if you look at now as a problem, right, it is not a one-off problem to be solved, right? And the FinOps culture, like the reason that we are always talking about, I would say the culture thing, right? Because it has to like really sustain in a recurrence altogether, right? Otherwise, I think it would have been a very simple job of basically, one or two basically, let's say, ki smart consultants like basically us to kind of like really sit down teams and like do that job and then go home altogether, right? But there's a reason, I think, that the culture thing is there in place. So I think to the question, the person that like who asked this, right? I think in order to kind of like, let's say if you are happening to be an individual contributor here, right? And you would want to kind of like really have this as a cultural shift, like to happen into the company, right? You need to sort of like really first build a case with your basically managers or any hierarchy of managers, right? That why this is basically a recurring problem into the company, if not basically so like dealt in a cultural way aspect of it, right? Because if this like I would say establishment is not there, I would say at any managerial level, right? That it is going to end up being a recurring problem, and it is going to bite back like every time basically we are dealing it with the like in a non-cultural aspect altogether, right? It is only basically going to kind of like really hurt us in a very, very long term, right? So in order to like, and the really way to kind of like really solve this effectively is to kind of like have a like change in culture, which is not just basically beneficial in terms of saving basically dollar money upon the cloud, right? But as I think we talked about, it is basically also basically basically make us, an like efficient company in terms of basically building out our systems like in the longer run altogether, right? So I think if that case is something that you can like really build before your managers, right? I think it is going to be that is, I think, the right approach to like really go about. I think we have done it like for a lot of companies, right? I think where like companies were sort of like really hesitant towards the idea of that, okay, hey, why do the basically other people like really get involved in the process, right? I mean, you give the product to like, let's say this one person in the DevOps team, and he'll basically do this job. And I think like you guys are also like really done at that point in time, right? And we had a like really hard time convincing, I think, like a lot of people across stakeholders, like in the value chain, that okay, hey, this is what it like really means to basically like solve, I would say, the problem of cloud cost in your benefit, not like that, okay, we are the vendors, we want to make a lot of money out of you, right? And I think like that is where I think culture enforcement is sort of like really required in the context that this is a recurring problem if you make it a problem for yourself.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for sharing that, Ayush and Vedic. I believe that really helped with the query our audience had with their question. So with this, we come to an end to our discussion. Thank you so much, Vedic and Ayush, for joining us today and sharing these wonderful insights with us. After this insightful discussion, we hope it helped our audience to understand how impactful it is to keep engineers engaged in FinOps practice. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, people. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Vedic. Yep. Okay.
Bye.